So let's start with your decision to run for school board. Can you unpack that a little bit for us and just explain, I know from your website what your background is and your family's history of civic involvement, but can you just tell us specifically about your decision when you made it and what the factors were for jumping into the school board race?
Absolutely. So as you know, with my background, I've always felt that I would get involved in public service. I thought it would be much sooner, actually. And then I went down a different path, going into private practice in the law and having a startup and now being in big tech. And then when I had kids during all of this, I thought I would need to wait until they were much older. But I realized that we need to have women, and particularly women with young children, in elected office in order for our voices to be heard. And even though it's certainly not convenient with young children. And so that's why I did the Emerge Candidate Training Boot Camp and also the Asian Pacific American Leadership Foundation's boot camp to just understand what it even would mean to run for office and to try to get involved in that way. And around the same time that I was looking into all of that, we were deciding where we wanted to send our oldest to school when it came time to go to kindergarten. In this case, he's in TK now because he's a November baby. And I have Google Sheets and Excel spreadsheets worth of research that we did on all the schools that we were interested in, that we would consider, not just even locally in California, but across the country and even internationally. And after hundreds of hours of research and watching different presentations about schools and learning methods, we decided on Palo Alto. And we gave up home ownership in San Francisco to become renters in Palo Alto because that's how badly we wanted our sons to go to the schools here. So when I came down and I thought about getting involved, I reached out to local community leaders and nonprofits, particularly those focused on early childhood education, because it's an area I'm passionate about. And one of them introduced me to Shana, who is currently running for re-election, and we had a lot of shared values about how we see the importance of schools, particularly when it comes to equity in our community. And I'm very passionate about that. I've seen that through volunteering at schools and through my background with women's studies and Asian American studies, double majors. And so he said, I don't know who else is running, you should run with me. And many women, it takes 11 asks for them to run for office. But for me, it took one, and I did a lot of research to figure out if I was qualified. And I determined that my background, my unique background, I think makes me particularly qualified. And so I said, yes, I will run. And here we are.
And here we are. So when exactly did you move to Palo Alto? And was that a factor? You just said you didn't know if you were qualified yet. So I assume that was residency had something to do with it.
Oh, I didn't mean qualified in terms of residency. I meant qualified in terms of my background and my experience, because okay. I think, like many people, I've been knocking on doors and talking to people and at farmers markets and community events, and a lot of people, myself included before, have a perception of what the school board does. But I think you really have to dig deeper and talk to I talked to Don Austin, the superintendent, and I talked to school board members, past and present, to understand what the role of the school board is, and school board members in other districts, not just our own. And that's where I wanted to understand if I was qualified for the actual job and the work at hand. And I believe that I am. But we did move here in April.
All right. So what are your thoughts when people say, it takes a while to get to know a community and a school community. It takes some years to become familiar, and that could be a handicap for you. What's your response to that kind of observation?
And I understand and very much respect that perspective. What I would say is that, again, from talking to a lot of different people within our community, I've learned that my family is a lot like many families here who moved here for the schools, and we have this shared value of wanting an excellent education and excellent educational opportunities for our children. And unlike someone who's been here for a long time, I know that I don't know everything. And so it's important for me to reach out and to get perspectives. And I'm able to, in a way, with a clean slate, talk to people on different sides of issues that maybe aren't even talking to each other anymore, and try to get their perspective. And that's why you'll see that I've met with and won the endorsement from different local electeds, past and present, and quite far back, because I'm trying to get as much perspective and historical context as I can on the issues in our school district. And I guess I would say, I believe our current school board, the shortest someone has lived in Palo Alto is 12 years on our current school board. Except obviously Jesse and Shana went away for school, but they're from here. And I think that's valuable, I do. And I think that there needs to be a room for someone that's different, that represents families that maybe don't have deep roots here, but nonetheless have the shared values and want to contribute to our schools. And so that's something that I think that I bring to the table that is unique and is a diverse perspective that I think will add to the school board.
All of those things would apply if you ran in 2 years rather than right now. Did you think about the timing of when it would be most welcome as a new arrival running for something like the school board?
Yes, and I have had that question, and I thought about it myself too, because as I mentioned, I have young kids, and I think every year it will get easier to actually run than right now with a 2 and an almost 5-year-old that are just starting in the district. I think for me, there are 2 things that I considered. One was that to some extent, every year that we live here, I lose some of that fresh perspective because I will become more biased to my own personal experience in the district, which again, I don't think is inherently a bad thing, but it's something that is unique to right now for me. And also in 2 years, I don't know what there'll be 3 seats up for election. And I don't know what the composition of the board will look like at that time. But at this time, I've met in depth with all 5 of the school board members, even Ken, who is outgoing. And I'm very excited to serve with, well, we'll see if Shana gets reelected, I hope so. And I would be very excited to serve with the 4 of them or whoever the other one is. And I feel like it's a particular opportunity because of my alignment, particularly with Jennifer DiBrienza, Jesse Latimeric, and Shana Drop, that to have the opportunity to serve with them in particular. And I also spoke at length with Todd Collins and feel that I could have a very good working relationship with him.
When you first decided to enter the race, were you aware of the other candidacies at that time, or were they subsequent to your deciding to run?
Thanks for asking. I was not at that time aware that Shana was interested in running. I had not heard about that, and I don't believe that the folks that I had spoken to at that time that were encouraging me to run were aware either. And I was also not aware. Maybe sometime around, I can't remember exactly when I became aware that Ingrid was running. I know that she had initially filed some paperwork before me, but because of the way that her committee had been named at first, it wasn't clear that she was running for school board, so it didn't come up in my initial research to see if anyone else had thrown their hat into the ring. So I really thought that I was the only one at that time.
Yeah, so that must have been quite a startling surprise when shortly after you announced that you were running, Shana announced that she was already planning on running.
I would say it was not surprising in the sense that I didn't think that I would run unopposed.
Sure.
But to find out who it was, I think maybe the most surprising part was that our kids, or my oldest and her kids, go to the same school, and we live mere blocks apart. And frequently, just even on Friday, run into each other on the street while we're walking around. So that's the biggest surprise, that we live so close together, and really, each neighborhood has its own community, and we're a part of the same community. So that was the biggest surprise.
And which elementary school is that?
Palo Verde. Which is currently at Greendale
for
this year. Yes. And my youngest is at Cubberley, or is also at Greendale, because he's in the preschool family 2's time.
Right.
So I spend majority of my time over there these days.
So your point is well taken, that you're fresh to the community. You can bring a fresh perspective to the district. what do you say to the comments that you at the same time are endorsed by Shana? And is there such an alignment of your viewpoints that there is not that kind of diversity of perspective, more broadly speaking, on various issues?
Well, I think
How do you
if you
differ?
watch, thanks for asking. I think that if you watch any of the many forums that we've had, you'll see that Shaunak and I don't agree on everything. And I'd be the first to, or he might be the first to tell you that he didn't say I should run because he thought that, you know, I would just vote with him on everything. I have my own opinions and arrive at them in a different way and with a different perspective. So I think that, and from speaking with the board members that support me, the current board members, that they value the diversity that I would bring. And so therefore, I believe there's understanding that I may not always agree with them. And in fact, that's what they want, is to hear the way that somebody else would think about things. So in terms of the ways that I differentiate myself from Shaunak, I don't have a point by point on all the things that we would agree differently about, but I know that we see things through a different lens, and particularly because he has now served for 4 years, he has, and I tell him this as well, there are things that I think the current school board could have done better. And so in that way, I think that differentiates us. Not that I'm saying that he thinks that he's done everything perfectly. I don't think anybody on the school board thinks that, especially with the hand that they were dealt with dealing with COVID and school reopening. But there are things that I would have done differently if it was me, or that I would like to do differently in the future if I'm elected.
All right, I want to return to a question that we asked of candidates during our forum, which was about the termination of the general counsel and transparency around that decision. You expressed the need to balance, of course, transparency and privacy interests. And I'm wondering, what is the line that you would step up to if you were on the board for having that balance, especially maximizing transparency? The decision itself was made in a closed session that lasted 4 minutes. So obviously, there was something that led up to it, and we were not given by the district an understanding of what that process was. And we did not get any kind of information about what opportunities were given to the employee, to be speaking her mind to the board. So I guess the question is, what is that line? Where would you step up to if you were in this situation as a board member right now?
Thanks for asking that, because I think this actually is a question that the answer could apply to many things that I just mentioned that I would do differently. So I would want to respect the privacy of the employee, the former employee, and as someone who has built a company, a venture funded startup, and scaled a team and dealt with complex questions about employment law, I would, and privacy, and I currently work in trust and safety in my current job, I would want to ensure that we're respecting that employee's privacy. But I think the issue is that there is a distrust that has been built because of a lack of transparency where there can be transparency. And I think it's a matter of the pendulum swinging too far in one direction. So when I talk to prior board members and gaining that historical perspective of what the board has been like, in the past, I understand board meetings were much longer. And there was a lot of conversation that happened at the dais, which gave people a lot more insight into what board members were thinking. And then due to wanting to streamline and be more efficient and effective as a board, I think the pendulum got swung too far the other way, where we don't see a lot of conversation happening. And so it's hard. And I've sat there during some of the things that they've discussed, like when the parents in May from Nixon and their students came and talked about the loss of classrooms for Kids' Choice, or watching back the board meetings about the ELA adoption process, or even watching back the board meetings about school reopening. It felt like sometimes when you don't have communication in front of the public, it feels like a rubber stamp process, and that contributes to people not understanding. And even if they would get behind something and support it, if they don't understand the reasoning behind it, it leads to this distrust of the motives behind decisions. And I think that we're now seeing that play out. And so although some things may have been well-intentioned, the rollout has been problematic. And now we spend time relitigating and redebating things that maybe we wouldn't have had to have those ongoing conversations if the process had been better and people had felt like they'd been communicated with, and reasoning behind decisions had been explained, or the process had been more transparent. So it's hard to say with this current, your question is about the general counsel. And I don't want to promise that I would have done anything specific there, because even with, like you said, the conversation was 4 minutes, there was obviously signs that it was going in this direction, as is the case with almost any terminations of employment, except for something egregious, that comes out of the blue, which I don't think was the case here. But I don't know, because I'm not privy to that. So I would want to understand if there was something more that could have been communicated. And then if so, communicate as much as possible. I guess that's my main answer. Is I think that, yes, we need to follow the law, but we need to communicate as much as possible about the reasoning behind things when we can, for everything, this included.
I assume you recognize and agree that providing legal advice at a corporation and a for-profit business is very different than a public agency. So should you be elected, you would need to adjust your thinking about what should be released and what should be a matter of privacy or not. In this particular case, this was an employee who reported directly to the board of trustees, had been there for 6 years, and basically nothing was provided to the public about the reasons for her dismissal. And she had authority over a lot of very important and sensitive areas of the administration of the school district. So it's not quite like an employee at a corporation being terminated and having some obligation to explain why.
Absolutely, and I understand that. And just for context, because I would hate for you to feel like I would misapply any law based on my prior experience. I understand how different employment law can be depending on the context. So, and some examples of different contexts I've worked on is I drafted bylaws for nonprofit boards that I've served on in the past, and that those kinds of things, nonprofits are very different than corporations. And I don't actually work in a legal role in my current occupation. I am still admitted to the bar, but I certainly don't try to step into legal matters claiming to be an expert on legal matters that I'm not. And so again, that's why I would have to better understand. And that's why I take the obligations of the board very seriously, because I do understand they have fiduciary duties. And so the question is whether what is in those fiduciary duties in terms of how much they communicate. And so, but again, I think the overall, what I'd like to convey most is that my overall belief here, what I would try to do within the bounds of the law and respecting privacy, would be to communicate more, always try to communicate more. And I think, unfortunately, we've had some issues recently trying to communicate less. And I don't think that's the way to go about it. Like, for example, I spoke up about Zoom commenting and remote participation. And that's just one example of, I think, the current climate of the board, some board members feeling that less communication from all different stakeholders within our community is better. And I just don't feel that way.
Thank you.
Since we're talking about communication, I've heard from a number of Palo Verde parents that they were unaware of the move to the Cubberley Greendale site until our article came out about that. Is that the fault of the superintendent? I know that in our questionnaire, you gave him a needs improvement grade for his soft skills. But when it comes to communication down the line, like, how do you improve that as a board member? I mean, besides just saying we need to communicate with people better, how is it? What kind of mechanisms or means do you think are needed at this point?
Well, and let me just first express that I am a parent at Palo Verde, and my child started TK this year, which is transitional kindergarten. And there was more communication needed there in terms of start times. I think I learned, or end times. I think I learned the end time for the day 10 days or 2 weeks before school started. And then actually it was miscommunicated. And I want to be very careful to say that I am not angry about it. I understand that there are a lot of moving pieces and it is hard, the back to school time. So I first and foremost want to make sure that, you know, our local admins at our school sites know that I understand that. And because it is so hard, I think we need to, as a district, to provide them with better support so that communicating with all the members of their community is easier for them, because they have to run a school with many, many students and teachers and staff. And that's hard. As somebody who comes from, you know, running operations at my startup and then having a technical and strategic operational role in my current job, I understand that as a parent, sometimes you're like, well, why didn't they just do this? And it's really easy to think about things, you know, one little thing that affected you when there are a lot of bigger operationally complex factors that need to be considered. So, but to get back to communications and specifically, instead of just hand waves of we need to improve communication, I think the first step is hiring a communications officer, which to my understanding, I believe in one of the forums they said that one had been hired. I think technically from a meeting that I had with Superintendent Austin, I understand an offer has been extended, but the board is going to need to approve that offer. I am hopeful that we will have a communications officer that will start this year. And by this year, I mean this calendar year, really, frankly, as soon as possible. And it's going to take more than that. So, so I think communication needs to be made easier for our individual school sites. I think it needs to be streamlined and easier to digest, even coming from the district. And I've talked to parents where, you know, if you get too many different emails, it's hard to know which one you should read. And so sometimes it's not just a matter of more communication, and this is why I think a communications officer and someone who really, this is what they do and this is their specific skill set to help us streamline the communications so that they're easier to be digested by very busy parents and stakeholders in our community.
I want to get into a rather complex topic here, which is differentiated education and the politics of this school board race. I'm sure you're well aware that you're being characterized as someone whose focus is very much on equity and in providing equal opportunities for all students. And your opponent, Shana Segal, is being characterized as someone who is much more oriented towards ensuring that high achieving students are getting the curriculum and the experience that those high achieving, more rigorous oriented parents want for their kids. And while she has stated an equal interest in equity, at least her supporters are very much positioning her candidacy as one that's responsive to the Chinese American community in town, of which there is a segment that believes very strongly that the Palo Alto Unified School District is not providing adequate opportunities for those children. Can you address just exactly where you're coming from in this discussion and why there's such a fierce effort to paint you as someone that is more concerned with those that are struggling in our schools than those that are seeking greater opportunities?
Thank you for this question. I'm really grateful that you asked it because it is complex. To say complex actually is an understatement. And I'm going to take it. I would like to really step back and talk about the role of a public school district, which I believe is to serve all of our students. Unlike a private school that gets to choose who to admit and at times who to kick out, we serve the students that are given to us, you know, whether that be through the Tinsley program or through residency or any number of things. And I think, and this is where I'm going to really take it back. we have to have conversations as a community about what equity means. And as someone who studied ethnic studies and gender studies and has degrees in that from my college career, I think I know, and being in the Chinese American community, I know that there are these larger, really heated national level conversations about the feeling that equity, and not just in the Chinese American community, to be clear, you talk about Black Lives Matter and all of the different racial justice things that we're facing now that are very important conversations to have. There is this feeling, and I understand, and it's hard, that equity means you're taking from to give to others. And I understand as a parent that can be hard when you think it's just I want what's best for my kid. And I believe, and one of the reasons why we really wanted public school for our kids was because of the belief that in the importance of equity. And I don't believe we can have equity in our greater community if we do not have equity in our public schools. And to be clear, I think it starts even younger than kindergarten. And that's why one of my platform pieces is investing in early childhood education and really providing universal preschool. Because I think that's where the opportunity gap, and I intentionally call it an opportunity gap and not achievement gap. I think that is where it starts, if not even earlier. So, and then I do want to have a note on this very complex multi-part question about Shana Segal. And in my campaign and in my coffee chats and in my knocking on doors and farmers market chats, I am focused on my campaign. And as a woman who supports other women, I am trying to avoid any conversation about that would be seen as putting down another woman. So while I can talk about where we stand differently, I have been focused on running my campaign and what I bring to the table and all the good work that I want to do. But I see your point about the folks that are supporting her versus the ones that are supporting me. And I guess I would focus on, I don't think equity hurts anyone. I understand that it can feel that way, but when you really get down to it, equity is good for everyone. And I mentioned it in my questionnaire answers to the week to your paper about how there's this friction about, do we serve those that are historically underserved and are not at grade level, or and everybody sees it as an or do we focus on the students that are excelling and allow them to excel and put resources into helping them excel even more? And then I talk to a lot of parents whose kids are in the middle and they feel like nobody cares about my kid. And so nobody is happy. And this is a problem. And we are a public school district, and somehow we're going to need to learn to work together and figure this out together. And I don't want anyone to feel like nobody cares, like people don't care about their kids, whether they're at the top, the middle, or the bottom in terms of achievement. So we need to have very tough conversations. And from what I've seen, from the people that I've talked to, these are some of the most divisive factions we have in our community that are no longer speaking to each other. And actually, I had people say, don't talk to those people, or don't talk to those people. And I said, no, I will talk to everyone, because that's what we need to do. We need to hear everyone, and everybody needs to feel heard. And I believe that there is a way to have everyone feel that their child is getting the support that they need. So, when you talk about math, which is where most of this debate seems to be circled right now, our students are all able to get at least one grade level above what is required. And there are diversity of opportunities once they hit high school where they can concurrently enroll and they can take all the math classes that they want. And so I think we have to make sure that, I guess I just think it goes back to culture. It goes back to understanding what we're doing and why we're doing it. And again, that goes back to communication too, and having these tough conversations. But in short, I am not anti-intellectual achievement or anti-intellectual or anti-math. I am for focusing on how we can make sure all of our students feel supported. And then we didn't even talk about, what gets left by the wayside that I think is really upsetting is our special education students. And those people need to be included in our discussions also. And that is the tough thing about running a public school district, is that, again, that duty we have to serve all of our students. So I don't know that I have all the exact answers right now, and I would be wary of anybody that says that they do without actually being in the district. But I think what it goes to is the way that I will think about things and approach the situation, which involves talking to everybody and knowing that we're not going to be able to make everyone happy, and that's not our job, but we do need to make sure to serve all of our students.
So thank you for that very thoughtful answer. I wonder if you were part of the segment of the community that is worried about this from the standpoint of an achievement, adequate achievement-oriented curriculum. Wouldn't it be natural that you would want board representation to include someone that reflected their viewpoint, so that as part of making people aware of the kinds of approaches that Palo Alto Unified is taking to accomplish what you just described, you've got a conduit of information back to those people through someone that they've supported in an election campaign? Because it seems to me that one of the things that's at risk here in this election is the idea that that voice, that opinion, whether it's correct or incorrect, or the right way to go or not, if it's not represented in the discussion at a board level, then we're continuing to exclude a segment of the community. And obviously, as someone that's promoting equity and diversity, you're basically denying a segment of that very diversity that you're promoting. So I wonder how you respond to that challenge and conundrum, basically.
And I would say that my goal, and again, one of the things that I think that I uniquely bring to the table, being newer to this community, is that I don't think that I don't represent that community. I have the opportunity to be a bridge builder and to fully understand their side, and then to try to work to make it happen. And I think that is better than someone that they feel like already supports them, but can't see the other side or is entrenched with them. Like, this is what we need. We need bridge builders, because there are plenty of people on both sides that are willing to share their opinions and are very passionate about it. And they're not talking to each other. So I think it's less important to have people that are labeled as being on one side or the other. And to be clear, I am resisting those labels, because again, I want to serve all of our students, even the ones that aren't in this equation of math, not math, which really it's not math also, to be clear. But that's kind of like what it's been boiled down to in terms of the rhetoric. So I guess I would resist the labeling that I'm on the other side. I understand if that's how it feels to some parents. And I would encourage you to ask Shana more about her belief in terms of the math situation, so that you can hear it straight from her, where she actually stands on these issues. I also want to point out some of the conversations I've already been having within the Asian American community are the fact that when you talk about equity, we do not have equity within the Asian American community, both because we are not a monolith, and within the Asian American community, we have high achieving and we have some of the lowest achieving. So we have an opportunity gap within our community, and then we have an opportunity gap beyond school, and in systemic inequity is there. So I've talked a lot about the bamboo ceiling for Asian Americans, or the glass ceiling for women, and the fact that if you really don't want to have that, I believe we all want to raise happy, healthy, successful humans, and success should be defined differently for each kid, because it is different. And if you want them to not experience that, they may succeed. Look at women in college, for example. Their colleges on average are over 50% women, but we do not have 50% or even close to a representation in our C-suites and our boardrooms. And so that's just like one very concrete example of, when you say you believe in equity, that's what it looks like. It means you believe it. I believe from the ground up. And every Asian American parent I've talked to doesn't want their kid just to be able to become extremely successful in high school and go to one of these prestigious schools and then try to find their dream job and hit the bamboo ceiling where they just can't go up because of systemic racism and inequity. And so again, if that's what you want for your kid, if you want your kid to be able to have opportunities all the way through, all the way up, then that means you believe in equity, or you should. And that means you have to stand for it the whole way up and realize that truly believing in equity is good for everyone.
So are there, do you have specific things that you would like to see done in terms of learning differentiation and the way the school district handles that, that's not being done now? I mean, we're talking in sort of philosophical terms here, and I'm wondering if you can be specific about what, as a board member, do you think needs to actually be changed?
I think most of us candidates would agree in terms of more support and to get concrete, support over the summer, support with after school, and making that universal, meaning finding a way to support that without having it cost anything. And then within the classroom, I've talked to a bunch of teachers as well, and I'm proudly endorsed by PAEA and our teachers union. And it is already a best practice to do your best to differentiate within the classroom. One of the things, when you talk about differentiated learning, one of the things is that some people use the same term to mean different things. There's differentiated learning within the classroom, and then there's differentiated learning where people are really talking about acceleration and tracking, and those are different things. And
well, and often one who supports one is opposed to the other. I mean, it's a dividing line.
It is very much so.
Yeah.
And I'm excited to see the results of the pilot regarding delaning math in middle school. And I have a feeling that we'll be revisiting that because, well, one,
revisiting things is part of the ongoing culture of Palo Alto.
Well, some would say that is innovating, continuing to innovate.
Right.
That would be the glass half full approach, right? I don't think that's inherently, I come from a startup culture. So that's what you do. You get an MVP, a minimum viable product, and you go, and then you learn, and then you change, and you grow. And it's not a bad thing. Unfortunately, I think, again, because of the way things have been rolled out and the communication and the very intense factions that aren't talking to each other, it's not a positive in our culture, the way that it's going. And I would want to change that. But I do think that it will be revisited. I've also heard from a lot of parents that had kids in middle school feeling that because middle school they feel has been watered down, their students are not prepared for high school. So I think you could talk about this with a lot of initiatives that have been rolled out and come under the heading of equity. There's this feeling, or for me, when I look at the big picture, there have been all these things, these changes that have been made, both for equity and for mental health. I think for both of those things, because those are two important, rightfully so, things that we're focused on, and I'm focused on in our district. But when you look at things in these, trying to do what you can in these different areas, sometimes you just don't have the way to understand when you first do it, what the ripple effect is going to be, or what is ultimately going to happen when you do that. So once you do it, I think you owe it to yourself. Really, the best thing to do is to look at what were the unintended consequences, and are those okay? Like with math delaning, do we feel that our students going from middle school to high school aren't prepared? Because that's certainly not the intent of anyone. So I'm excited to kind of usher in an era where we say we learn from everything, and we don't view it as failure, but we view it as all part of the process of figuring out how to educate our students, all of them, so that they can all be successful in their own way. And so that's what I would do. I would look at all the things that we've done and try to really do surveys and look at the data and look at the results, and test scores are part of it, certainly, but I also want to find a way to more holistically determine progress of a whole student by looking at other things in addition to test scores, which is harder, I know, but I think that's the way that we should be innovating. And then try to see, what are unintended consequences that we're not okay with, and how do we kind of adjust and make tweaks so that we're getting the result we want out of something without the unintended consequences. And we may then see new unintended consequences. And that's just part of the iteration process and something that is uncomfortable, and we are going to have to get more comfortable with if we really want to improve mental health and well-being and equity in our district and just make sure all of our kids are thriving.
And if you don't mind me hopping in, Bill. If you don't mind me hopping in, I had a question kind of on the current middle school math program. As I'm sure you know, the system has 8th graders generally taking Algebra 1 with a potential for people to accelerate by a year and take geometry if they pass a district test. Do you support continuing to have Algebra 1 in 8th grade, or would you be in favor of moving it to 9th grade as California Math Framework suggested, or something else entirely?
So I would resist making a call on that until we're able to see through the current pilot. So we have 2 more years, because I think you do have to see through a pilot and its desired length, unless of course something horrible is happening where you need to address it right away and pull out of it. I think, and I know there probably are parents that feel that this is that case where we should just pull out of it. I understand that too. So for me, I feel that we should wait and see it out and really look at what has happened as a result of that pilot before we decide what to do. I'm encouraged by the fact that our students are still able to, just with taking the required courses, get above what is required by the state. So that would be one of the things in favor for me of saying that I'm okay staying out the pilot, that I don't think we need to stop it right now. Also because of the opportunities with concurrent enrollment and with all the other math classes that students are able to take once they hit high school.
Thank you.
I want to ask you about teacher accountability. Do you believe that ineffective teachers should be held accountable? And I'm not talking about just supported, but actually held accountable if they're found to be not actually educating students well. And as a board member, if so, what process or means would you advocate for making sure that they're held accountable?
So I think any discussion of teacher accountability, we have to also think about the way, again, it goes back to the way we measure student progress. And so I don't think that teachers should only be measured on test results. Of course, test results are something concrete, and I'm not saying we shouldn't factor them in, but I think that there should be other determinants for students and for teachers about student progress. And then I do think we need to find ways to continue to improve the resources we provide and professional development. And I think that when we talk about what professional development we offer, we need to talk to our teachers and our staff about what would be most effective, because I think there's a lack of communication at that level too. And that's what I mean about the communication situation in our district. It's not even just the district or the school sites with parents and students, it's also with teachers and staff. And I think these conversations about the ways we look at teacher progress and teacher results should include teachers and the union in those discussions about how we can measure progress and how we can support them. And then ultimately about how we make tough decisions if we feel that someone is not performing. I also know that I was surprised to learn about the tenure decision, and the tenure decision has to be made halfway through a teacher's first year, I think it is what I learned, which seems very fast to have to make that decision. And so, but again, these go to complex issues that I don't want to make any promises on without better understanding. And I haven't been privy to union negotiations, and I do believe in unions and I support them. And so I would want to be a part of understanding, what teachers want, what the union wants, and how we can work together to make sure, because I know I have teachers in my family, my grandmother, my aunts, like I know that they only do it because they really want to educate our kids and to be good teachers. So I don't think there's any bad intent there, because they're certainly not, paid as much as other industries. And although some people think they get their summers off, they do work crazy hours and have a lot on their plates and a lot of responsibilities. So I I respect that. And I just want us to have a healthier relationship with our teachers and our staff.
Yeah, and for sure, to bring up the accountability questions, not to malign the intentions or the abilities of the vast majority of teachers. But, every now and then there are teachers who are there who just do not do their job. And the accountability question does come up.
And I wanted to add one more thing, because I recently had a really great conversation with a math tutor who wanted to share her opinions with me about the math debate in our district. And she mentioned about substitutes. And I think sometimes we have seen some of the, what you said, accountability issues coming with teacher absenteeism, for example. And I think as we talk about this and what do, we have to also remember that we have to continue serving our students. And so I just wanted to call out that I think there's room for us to innovate also in terms of the way we think about substitute teachers. So this particular math tutor was saying how she would like to be able to specifically tutor or specifically sub just for math, and only teachers in which she had shadowed and understand their teaching approach so that she can provide the best experience to the students as a substitute. And she was willing to go to do that on her own dime, take the time to shadow those teachers and understand. And so she said, I could shadow 3, and then those are the only 3 I'm available to substitute for. And again, this goes back to the thing where I understand complex operations and, can we support that? But I think her general philosophy behind it was good, in that, can we make sure that we have a bench of substitutes for certain subjects where it is hard to step in, and can we compensate them for shadowing those teachers, a handful of teachers, or maybe all the teachers for a certain grade, or we could figure out what would work operationally and financially, but to basically ensure that if absenteeism is an issue, that we're still continuing to provide an excellent education for our students, even if they have a substitute, especially in those classes like math, where they really need consistency of educational approach.
If I can ask, you'd mentioned earlier wanting to find ways other than just standardized tests to evaluate students, and then by extension to evaluate teachers too. And you acknowledge that can be difficult. What are some of those alternatives to standardized tests that you'd favor the district using? I guess kind of what would you consider beyond tests?
So I think there is a need to assess the social emotional level of the student, because I one particular concern with math in middle school is when you talk about skipping multiple grades and putting someone who is quite a bit younger with students that are quite a bit older, there are interactions within the class, and there are many things that go into whether a student is ready to learn that level of math, not just the math itself, but the environment in which they're learning it, and brain development, and all these things that get weighed in when experts make curriculum recommendations to the state and to our district and our committees that determine curriculum, or at least put forward a recommendation which the board then votes on. So I would want to, and I think there's also room for the teachers to weigh in on the whole student and whether they're ready, for example, when you talk about skipping grades, because the teachers are the ones that are with them the majority of the time. And of course, with any qualitative assessment, you also have to be careful of implicit, and even unknown biases. So there's a lot of things we'd have to address. And that's why, again, I don't think that there can ever be one test that you look at and it's perfect and unflawed. So that's why I think we need to look at multiple things. And I think, the Every Student Reads initiative that's focused on reading by age 8, I think is a great example of realizing that, the key performance indicators, the KPIs that we just looked at in the last school board meeting, they originally had 2 KPIs. And then they said, this is not sufficient, we need to add a 3rd. And so that's exactly the kind of spirit that I think that we should have is, if we need to measure in more ways, let's measure in more ways. And then you can also see, like, maybe one of the original KPIs will drop off because we'll find that it's flawed in some way or something like that, or there's a better KPI. But we're all learning together. And as long as we have open communication and as much transparency as we can, I hope that people can take up a collaborative and partnership-based mindset.
Thank you.
All right, well, I'm mindful of our time. Just wanted to see if anyone had any last minute questions, including Adam. I know he's there by his phone.
Let me ask a question unless Adam jumps in here, just to wrap it up. Nicole, if you were a voter, or for those voters that are not particularly attached to the debate that's going on between you and Shana, I wonder how you would describe the differentiation between the two of you, other than your different backgrounds, on the matters that parents are concerned with in this district, and how you and Shana would approach them based on what you've heard at candidates meetings and events. What makes you and the two of you different, other than your backgrounds?
See, I guess I would say I think that our backgrounds and our perspective are the biggest differentiator between us. And by background, I mean our experience. So it's hard for me to say separate from our experience.
I'm going to push you not to address those, because those are pretty concrete and clear. I'm really interested in whether during the early part of this campaign, things have been brought up, statements have been made about issues, about direction, about values, about policies, that you would say to yourself, wow, Shana and I have a different view of that.
I'll use one very specific, first of all, before I answer this question, I'd like to acknowledge that it is not a race between Shana and I. And I respect her. And I think she's done a very good job at getting out her experience. I do just want to say that I feel like some of the people that have said things about me don't fully understand my experience and my background. Like, it's been said that I have no experience in education, and that's just untrue. I have done volunteer work in schools. It's been said I have no experience in middle and high school, and I do. That's actually where my volunteer experience has come in. And now I'm very interested in, since having children, have become very interested, particularly with a focus on early childhood education. But I just want to put that out there into the public record. And then I will answer, yes, I want to answer your question as well. So just one example that I would use is, and it's hard for me because, again, I'm really trying to run my own campaign. And so I don't want anything I say to differentiate to be taken as an attack on another female candidate, because that's really important to me. That is not the way that I want to run. But I will say that I think I've said it, and I'll continue to say it, we need to have tough conversations in our community. And I am a biracial Asian American woman that has a formal education in looking at issues of systemic inequity. And I think that is something that I bring to the table that we need present on our school board. And so this is the example I'll give you, is that one of you recently published an article where you showed all of our answers, the candidates' answers to the question about diversity and inclusion and feeling safe at school. And Ingrid Campos's answer came before mine, and it could not have been a starker contrast in terms of what we believe. And you'll see it also at the candidate forums. If people watched our forum, you would see that we have very different views of the world, and our values are very different. And I do have family values. My family values are progressive and liberal, and hers are traditional, conservative, although I resist calling it traditional, but conservative family values. Our family values are clearly very different. But just yesterday at a farmer's market, a woman came up that said something along the lines that she was upset that white children are being blamed for everything. These are her words, which really strikes me and gets me thinking about what we talked about with equity. And unfortunately, and I understand why people feel that equity means taking from to give to others. And this woman came up to Shana. It didn't come up to me, and I think we know why. Just from how we appear, she and to Shauna's credit, she told her, I don't think I'm the candidate for you. And I was glad that she said that. And I think it's good that she didn't, some candidates with lower values would pander to get some, would let that woman speak and not say anything, and nod along and let that woman think they're in alignment. And Shana didn't do that. So I want to credit Shana for that. I will say that if that woman had approached me, I would have had the tough conversation. I would have talked to her about how nobody thinks that white kids are to blame for everything. And this goes back to why we can't be colorblind, because these kids have nothing to do with the inequity that we see. And they're just experiencing it in their lived lives, and it's not even a choice. So, and I'm getting emotional because I think about this as I raise my kids, and we have privilege in many ways. We do, and that's again why I'm running, is because we are really privileged. And I think with privilege comes duty. And in my case, given my background, I think it comes the duty to speak up. And so in that instance, I would have had the tough conversation. And I would have explained to her my way of seeing the situation, and tried to explain to her how things like equity are not bad and critical race theory is not bad, and how we all need to see that it's none of our kids' fault and nobody's trying to take from anyone. So it would have been a long conversation, and I don't know if she would have been open to it, but I would have tried to have it, and we need to try to have it. And so that's just one example of what I think, not our experience, which you can all read about, and it is very different. But I think we're both good people, and yet we have very different backgrounds and lived experience, and different passions and different things that we're focused on. And that is one example of how I think we play out differently.
Great, thank you for that.
Thank you so much, Nicole. And we really appreciate your time today. And thank you for your willingness to step forward to try to serve the community in this way. Really appreciate you. So that wraps us up for today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your time.
Yeah.
Thank you.